Hey yo, it's Retro. Welcome to another video. Y'all, today I've been reading some X-Men comics recently. I just reread Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon, John Cassaday, and then also New X-Men by Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly. Today I got a really fun one. Like, this is mostly talking about like that era of X-Men comics. And really, the X-Men are no stranger to having defining eras that would change the state of comics entirely. These two specifically, especially. It seems like almost every 10 years or so, we get something entirely new for this team. From Len Wein, Chris Claremont, and Dave Cockrum blasting onto the scene with giant-sized X-Men #1 back in the 70s to save the X-Men as a title. This created team would drive X-Men as a title following this through X-Men number 94 back in the 70s and the 80s. Following this, Chris Claremont would take over completely as writer, along with Dave Cockrum and a whole host of artists following that, to completely change the identity of the X-Men. This turned into a 14-year-long saga spearheaded by Chris Claremont, completely redefining the X-Men, the mutant metaphor, and drama in comics. This successful change in direction would last until 1991 with the relaunched adjectiveless X-Men at issue 3 alongside Jim Lee. By this point, the X-Men would have become an extremely lucrative franchise, spanning multiple different spin-off titles and even garnering the accomplishment of having the highest grossing comic issue at the time, X-Men #1 by Chris Claremont, Jim Lee, and Scott Williams. Chris Claremont eventually leaves the title at issue 3 of this relaunch, and the X-Men would sort of spiral for the rest of the 90s, constantly crossing over, having stuff like Fatal Attractions, Phalanx Covenant, the rescue of Professor Xavier. It really became a shell of its former self. Then Fox would buy out the X-Men as a franchise, and they would release their first X-Men movie. There was leather, Hugh Jackman, and a need to redefine the X-Men in the 21st century. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, this is primarily focusing on New X-Men by Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly, alongside Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday. Two X-Men comics that I really think changed the direction of the X-Men in this modern era. These are two really era-defining runs that will quite literally run one after the other. And in a lot of ways, like, it's kind of a shock that you would get these two right after another. These feel like they should have been about like 10 years apart or even 5 years apart, but really there was like 2 or 3 years between the end of New X-Men and Astonishing X-Men. And they offer different qualities depending on what you're really looking for. So let's get into the first of these two. New X-Men, E for Extinction by Grant Morrison and Frank Quietly. Grant Morrison needs no introduction, neither does Frank Quietly. These are two comic powerhouses. Grant Morrison is one of my favorite writers ever. They are quite literally what I look for in comics, between the abstraction, the drama, and the intricate storytelling that he does, while also keeping it fairly simple in the message. And then you have Frank Quietly, who has one of the most interesting art styles ever. It has such an interesting texture to it. It feels like you could really touch what's in the comic. Frank Quietly's art style is, in a lot of spaces, an acquired taste, but I feel like that is just a oversimplification of his style. It's a very intentional style, and I think that he is genuinely one of the best artists. Some people, if at first glance you may not like it, you may think his faces are ugly, you may think a lot of these characters look weird, but that is the surface. How he lays out the page, how he draws clothes, how he is able to draw expressions. Frank Quietly is an exceptional artist, and really, like I said, these two don't need introductions, but I had to say that just because I love these two as a duo. Flex Mentalo, Batman and Robin, these two are some of my favorite comic duos ever. One of the best comic duos. But Morrison and Quietly's approach to the New X-Men was something that felt so much like what we know today as the MCU synergy, just with the Fox movies at the time. But I would be extremely hard-pressed to truly view it as just that. And what do I mean by that? So MCU synergy, if you don't know, is essentially just this trend where, because the MCU is so popular, Marvel has to make comics that kind of mirror the movies. And it's not 100% true. A lot of times it's more so in cosmetic than really in character. With New X-Men, it is more so in cosmetic extremely, and also with the team that is there. It's a lot of leather. They're wearing leather jackets, leather pants. They're mostly wearing black and yellow. And while they do have more color than the Fox movies at the time, it was still a sharp direction change from what the X-Men looked like in the 90s and in the 80s, where they were wearing colorful costumes and everything. In a time where the X-Men were at their most popular, but also had comics that were losing its fan base, New X-Men was the perfect thing for this franchise. This was a great and big shakeup that would help pivot this franchise in the right direction. Morrison quietly took this opportunity to bring the New X-Men into the 21st century. Now, Grant Morrison, like I said, is famously known for using high concept and abstract ideas to tell their stories. But Grant Morrison's stories are often quite simple, really using abstraction as a bit of a guise to tell those stories. However, I do think New X-Men is probably their most tame in terms of it being not that abstract. Like, the story isn't that crazy to think about. Now, New X-Men would strip the team of their superhero image as they move forward to protect mutant kind in a much different way than years past. Now, during Claremont's X-Men saga, I know I'm going back, but stay with me, he created a mutant nation called Genosha, which housed roughly 16 million mutants by the time of New X-Men. And this was a pretty staple nation for this title, having even characters like Kitty Pryde's parents living there. This new creative team took an extremely bold move and decided to completely eradicate this nation by the hands of their new villain, Cassandra Nova. Now, that is harsh, but also it's fucking awesome. Like, what an incredible introduction for a villain, your villain. And this series would kind of continue that trend. Cassandra Nova is one of the best creations in the past like 25 years for the X-Men, a very staple villain and one of the best like retcons in the X-Men history. This same villain is also the spokesperson for the idea that the X gene is a sign for human evolution, along with introducing the idea of secondary mutations. Now, being a spokesperson for the X gene being an evolution isn't new. We had that with Magneto, but Cassandra Nova here is doing that with this whole idea of there being a secondary mutation and really sowing the seeds to separate humanity and mutant kind. Now, at this point, Emma Frost and Hank McCoy gained both of these secondary mutations. Emma Frost with her diamond form and Hank McCoy further evolving into a beast. Morrison and Frank quietly used this new idea to put into question the mutant metaphor in an interesting way, showcasing the X gene as a disability and using the New X-Men to support and defend this case, while Cassandra Nova, Xavier's twin sister, weaponizes the X gene as the next step of humanity. Contrasting these two beliefs and really pushing the boundaries for what the X-Men and mutant kind stand for, and how the mutant metaphor isn't as simple as it seems. The core of this title The core of this title is really the team's change in direction and secondary mutation. The handling of the mutant metaphor is exceptional, and I really enjoyed the way Grant Morrison decided to put the definition as more of a hypothesis than a straight up answer. There is a correct answer to me, and obviously the evil villain who committed genocide isn't correct. This saga would go through multiple arcs. Now, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely's saga would go on for multiple arcs, sowing seeds for Cyclops' eventual rebellion from Xavier and increasing Emma Frost's importance to the team. New X-Men is, for a long time, my favorite X-Men run, and probably still is. Like, if I had to pick one to go to, New X-Men would be the one. There is so much in this run, and even going back, I saw how it definitely laid the foundation for the future of the X-Men. But it's a lot more subtle than the future titles. New X-Men is what you call genre-defining comics, and I absolutely adore this comic. Frank Quitely's art in this, the cinematic sequences, the layouts, even having Chris Bachalo come in later, like even Phil Jimenez comes in as well. Like, this is a X-Men saga, and while I would have liked Frank Quitely to draw the entire thing, I still think that Grant Morrison spun just an incredible story that really changed what the X-Men look like, and it was definitely needed for the title. The X-Men were in a bad spot in the 90s, and this really pushed them into the 21st century and allowed for so many writers later to pick up plot lines and seeds and build upon them. It's an exceptional run. I think if you have not read New X-Men, or if you are maybe trepidatious because you see certain things, look, the Magneto reveal is not the best. And Planet X, something like that, the final arc, also not the best. But I also don't think it's horrible. I think that every arc has its blunders, and pretty much up until those arcs, New X-Men is like 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. New X-Men is a perfect comic, damn near. So now, following New X-Men and Grant Morrison's departure from the title, you would get Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday. This title took everything that Grant Morrison and Frank Wiley built and said, nah, fuck all that. Like, push that to the side. The X-Men are superheroes, and they should operate as such. Grant Morrison and Frank Wiley's approach to the X-Men was more so like a militia in a way. They were like a strike team. They were like a rescue strike team along with having a school. In Astonishing X-Men, they are treated straight up like a superhero team, like up there with like the way JLA is written. And the great thing, however, is Whedon and Cassaday don't forego history. They don't reboot. It's very easy, and I will say this very plainly. It is very easy for a brand new comic to just forget what happened before it. It would have been very easy for Astonishing X-Men to do that in the name of being like, we are superheroes. And there is a tendency some writers have to essentially use the comic medium as a way to retcon the past because they don't like what happened. However, Whedon and Cassaday fundamentally move forward and sort of use the past to dictate how they should progress, becoming superheroes again and operating as such to change public perception. Now, at this time, X-Men did not have the greatest PR. Mutants did not have the greatest PR. Following Genosha and Magneto taking over New York, it is not a great time to be a mutant by the time Astonishing X-Men is running. The X-Men's image really faltered, and they do need that big push. And Cyclops, as a leader, steps up and says, we need to change this. Posing this great mission statement of this series out of desperation and urgency to ensure the safety of his people. He is a phenomenal leader in this series. And he is also great in New X-Men, but especially in Astonishing X-Men, you see that by any means necessary directive from Cyclops. As a team, the X-Men want to astonish the public, make them be known they are here to not just protect their own people, but the entire world. The main conflict in the opening arc surrounds an alien warlord Ord from Breakworld, who's come to Earth to aid a geneticist in creating a cure for the X gene. This Astonishing X-Men and New X-Men are kind of like two sides of what X-Men really look like, especially back during Chris Claremont's. New X-Men really feels like it brought the drama and the strike team side of it, and then Astonishing X-Men really brought the cosmic side of it. A lot of it does feel like a bit of a strike team, but it's mostly dealing with cosmic Marvel and like space and also the mutant metaphor. If you want like a great example of what the X-Men look like, these two runs are it. Now back to Astonishing X-Men. Ord from Breakworld is this alien warlord who wants to prevent this prophecy of the destruction of his world, which comes to really one of the biggest conversations when talking about X-Men comics, the mutant metaphor and how it's handled. Now, like I said earlier, I felt like Grant Morrison handled it very well, with the X-Men team kind of treating it as a disability. And to me, that is the best way to kind of deal with it. Once you get into kind of race and discrimination of race, it kind of gets muddled just because the main team always looks the way, well, Astonishing X-Men and New X-Men look like. It's white. And sometimes you will have examples where you have a black character on the team like Bishop, Storm, or even on New Mutants where you have Sunspot. But it's really a lot more white than it is like, you know, like I think the best way to handle the X gene is to deal with it as a disability, because then you can get people that look all shapes and different sizes and anything. You can have people that look like anything and it would apply very well, because then they are also still talking about the way they look. Often when the metaphor is treated like racial discrimination, it just falls on deaf ears. And like I said, even with this run, it's 100% white. Even under all that blue fur, Beast, I see you, but you're not blue, you're white. But I feel like Whedon and Cassaday took the same approach of treating the X gene as a disability. Often a disability can feel like a superpower, and I feel like it's very apt here, especially with the lack of color in both this and New X-Men's main team. I'm not the best person to talk about disability. I will be straight up with you. Even beyond that, Astonishing X-Men is just oozing with drama as well. Like, often I say a great X-Men run is only ever as great as the drama within it. That can be hit or miss depending on the era. So, but this Astonishing X-Men, New X-Men, it is drama filled. Astonishing X-Men feels like a telenovela, and I fucking love it. I love it. If you haven't read it, read it now. I swear to God to you. Every issue, you can never question what a character is feeling, but everyone always has something to say, and it's just so, like, I wouldn't say it's dialogue heavy, because there's a lot of pages where the dialogue is written in the characters' faces, but that's when it's just so much more powerful. Now, I say all this, but like, quite frankly, I'm coming back to this run because my feelings toward this run have soured over the years, to say the least. This was one of the first full X-Men runs I read like years ago, like when I was first starting reading comics. And as a kid, I remember deeply loving it. But as I grew older, I began to believe the book was a much more simple take on the team than I would like. And while that is still mostly true, from the team presented to us, to the handling of the mutant metaphor, to the fact that their mission statement is to be superheroes, it's a glamorous and bold take on the X-Men that does its best to make them look like superheroes. But it always felt like, with the lack of diversity on the team and how much this run felt like it was more so hype moments and aura, I just began to respect Morrison's New X-Men more. Now, this could be a tribute of a lot of things, and quite frankly, it could just be the fact that I hadn't read it in so long, and I was just like, I just wasn't jiving with it. Like, it, you know, hindsight sometimes isn't 2020. Now, almost 15 years later, I revisited this run just to talk about this video, and I was so sorely mistaken. Astonishing X-Men taking a more superheroic take is the greatest strength of this title outside of the art, which we'll get to later. This series is bold, drama filled, and just an absolute joy to read. I feel like even if you don't like everyone in the series, you would still appreciate their role in this. Cyclops' role as a leader is unwavering and unquestionably one of the best parts of this run. Emma Frost's ties to the Hellfire Club, conflicting with her love for Scott, is the most telenovela writing you can have for their romance, and it is perfect. Like, every issue just feels like juicy drama, and also the way her conflict is resolved is just wonderful. Kitty Pryde finally being treated like a young adult here is also great. She is like a teenager up until this point. From the moment she is introduced up until this point, she is a teenager, and that's about like 20-30 years. And while a lot of it is good, there are some things that are just kind of weird. Especially Piotr. I'm really still not the biggest fan of her relationship with Colossus. Even outside of the age gap at the beginning of the relationship in the 80s being an issue, it's still just like, their relationship just doesn't work for me. It works for the plot being told here, and I love how much she takes leadership in this series, but it is still just like, their chemistry isn't the best, and it feels a bit forced sometimes. This run is just a lot of fun, and 25 issues of pure Joss Whedon and John Cassaday and Laura Martin excellence is a one-in-a-lifetime experience. Truly, if you haven't read this, I'm gonna say it again, read it, I swear. Please just read it. You don't get this kind of creative team in a lot, like, especially for 25 straight issues. It's 25 straight issues of Joss Whedon, John Cassaday, and Laura Martin. No backup artists, nothing like that. And speaking of John Cassaday, rest in peace. One of the pioneers of the widescreen era of comics. This is one of the best examples as to why he is such an amazing artist. This series wouldn't be the same without him, truthfully. Whedon's scripting, along with the way Cassaday plots his layouts and draws this book, is like a well-oiled machine. You can feel the chemistry between these three creators all throughout the page in this comic, and it really pushes the boundaries of this comic and elevates it. Again, rest in peace, John Cassaday. You are sorely missed, but greatly and honorably appreciated. New X-Men and Astonishing X-Men are two comics that you look at and be like, this is where X-Men changed forever, really. And following these two titles, you really get like the start of something new with the X-Men. Professor Xavier isn't really a part of this. You have Cyclops rebelling and becoming his own kind of leader and really taking over mutant kind and being the leader he needs to be, being a militant leader. The modern X-Men is an interesting time. And I love these two comics, and I feel like they're sometimes at odds with each other, but also they're really in conversation with each other. Should the X-Men be superheroes, or should they be this militant strike team? Pick one. They both work, and they handle the mutant metaphor perfectly. Yeah, I love these two comics. If you haven't read them, please do. And if you have, let me know in the comment section below which one you prefer. And yeah, that's the video. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch y'all next video. Peace.